speaker. First of all, I want to look at whether this is a legitimate use of benefits and whether this is how we should conceptualise benefits in terms of rights. Second of all, I want to look at whether this is economically better, specifically looking at whether it's economically better for the poor. But first of all, I want to directly respond to the last speaker. So the first thing that came out and said is that we have the principle of welfare is we have a minimum standard of living. Like, that is true, but we are still providing that minimum standard of living. All we are saying, was never engaged with what Ben told you, is that minimum standard of living, that conception of a good life, should not be able to triumph over lots of other people who are paying taxes, yeah? Like, unemployed people obviously have it economically bad, but there are loads and loads of employed people who also have it economically bad, insofar as they are like often on a string-type budget, living on like not particularly high-paying jobs, who all contribute to that tax basis. What we're saying is that your right is not absolute in terms of that welfare, and therefore that's why you don't have a right why there is a legitimate right of restriction of movements here for all those people that contribute to that. Second of all, we have this idea of like these problems are being caused by the government. Well, first of all, we think that this is a solution, as I'm going to come on to talk about, in terms of how we actually solve these things. But second of all, even if it is a problem like initially caused by the government at some point years ago, that doesn't change the fact that we have a responsibility to these people who first of all pay tax, but second of all to actually get these people back on the road. Then we have this idea of this like dying parent, like who that's the reason why like, the vast majority of unemployment exists in these kinds of areas, because apparently everyone has dying parents. Like, first of all, we don't think this is true, and it's really unfair emotional blackmail, particularly because there's a distinction between carers benefit and unemployment benefit. Yeah, like it's not true that we're just going to sort of like take all the carers and the elderly people of the northeast and throw them into the London. That's ridiculous. Thank you. Right. So then we have this big contestant, which is like, where will they find jobs? Like, first of all, note that London is not the only area that demands jobs at the moment. The kinds of areas that we're talking about, moving places, are clearly areas where, insofar as jobs do exist in the country, there is most demand for them. No, thank you. So why will we actually get a much better job? Like, why will we actually get much better jobs out of this? Well, first of all, note that there is a knock-on effect of the spending that Ben tells you about, which is the reason why companies like prefer going to London rather than other places, because many more people have jobs, and that increases the spending. So if they provide more jobs there, that has a benefit in terms of someone else paying a wage knocks onto someone else's spending upon their product. But second of all, note that companies like to invest in places where there are other surrounding industries that benefit them. That's how Ben gives you the example of FedEx in terms of why they want to set up in London, because there are lots of other industries around them that can help. That's why these kinds of places are the kinds of places that you actually do get much better knock-ons on. No, thank you. Also note we will have a better ability to target government spending at the point that we lower our social security bill, which in the UK is the biggest thing that we spend government money on. Second of all, we will get a lot more tax revenue, and we can actually use that to kind of invest in all of the kinds of places they want to invest in terms of like regenerating these socially poor areas. Finally, what we say is in terms of that there isn't a like finite amount of production, yeah? Like, obviously there is a demand issue with some of the unemployment we have, but there's also a skills mismatch issue. Insofar as there are like, lots of companies that want to invest specifically in London rather than other places, or specifically in other cities, simply because they don't feel that the kinds of places like the North East necessarily have those skills. That's why we do require immigration to like make up certain things within our employment market. Yeah, when we start to move those people into the areas that we are actually that they are actually more likely to develop those skills and gain those jobs, because we don't think skills are that useful unless there is a job after it, particularly as there are massive harms to those skills if you're unemployed for a particularly long amount of time. No, thank you. So that's why we don't think there's a finite amount of jobs, and that's why we think we get a lot more under our model. So moving on to no, thank you. So moving on to the rest of the debate, whether this is legitimate in terms of benefits. Opening government rightly point out the state has an interest to act in the interest of all individuals. No, thank you. And then opening up claims that we have a responsibility to care for these people insofar as they are marginalised. First of all, we'll prove later why this is better economically for them. We do think that's different, and this is what Ben tells you. We obviously have a responsibility to care about them if they are marginalised, but that's different to having a sole responsibility to them compared to other people that we also have a responsibility to. So lots of people, as Ben explained, are also in a disenfranchised state insofar as they have low-paying jobs but still have to contribute to the tax that makes up the unemployment benefit for other people. The point is that we give people a choice with benefits. We say, we want you to have jobs, we want to enable you to get that job and have a minimum standard of living before that. We think the kinds of people that do have an ability to move and aren't moving at the moment can access that choice under the model that we have today. No, thank you. And we think that, moreover, we think that they're neglecting their duty. If there is a job out for them somewhere where they can move to, in terms of not contributing to that tax revenue resource, no, thank you, to pay for the people that really are vulnerable, the disabled people that Ben talks about. So let's talk about why this is economically better specifically for the poor. No, thank you. Because opening up, claiming we won't get jobs in these areas. So let's look at why individuals will actually get these jobs and why they will be created. First of all, it's just more likely they will get jobs insofar as now training programs can be effective when there's much more likely there are jobs there. But second of all, we note even if it is true that some people won't instantaneously get jobs, we do change that psychological mindset at the point that you don't have that same level of cyclical unemployment that you have in all of these other places. Specifically things like generational unemployment, where now your kids know a lot of other people who happen to have jobs, or a lot of other parents that happen to have jobs, rather than huge cultures of unemployment that we see. But also there is a reason, no thank you, why we can better directly target spending there. Because as Ben tells you with his BAE example, it's much easier to actually encourage people, like private investors, to invest in a place where the small amount of money they invest is likely to go further, which is much more likely in London where they can access those existing resources, or in Sheffield if we want to talk about factories, rather than having to outlay huge amounts of costs it requires to set up in completely new areas. But also what we say is that we actually do think it's good for them to be in a place where they're more likely to get a job, no thank you, and moreover that you have an ability to change that culture of unemployment. But that rational change is a push that's required. First of all, because of the coercion that he tells you about, which isn't responded to in terms of family and friends saying, why do you want to move? There's no point in moving if you have the exact same quality of life here as you will have over there. But second of all, what we say is that you're able, it's very difficult for someone in a position where they haven't left their home before to make that association where they choose to want to move. But we think even though that is rational for them, it's a very difficult thing for individuals to do. Sometimes we think it's important, as open governments also accept, to force people into doing something they may not immediately want to do, but we think is actually beneficial for them because it can be a bit scary. Finally, what we would say in terms of opening up, trying to claim that we can just invest in these areas. First of all, it's much more likely we can invest in those areas when Ben tells you the economic benefits we get increases our tax revenue and we can actually target the spending of these areas. But second of all, what we say is the reason why there isn't much political will to do that at the moment is because there are people that are perceived wrongly by the Daily Mail Brigade to be moochers of the state. We think we massively change that perception and enable the kind of political will we can to actually invest in these areas at the point this happens. I'm very proud to propose this move.